In the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC, the eastern Mediterranean world was in turmoil. Great Bronze Age powers were collapsing. The Hittite Empire had fallen, cities across the Levant were burning, and long-established trade networks were disintegrating. This upheaval, known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, created a domino effect of chaos. Amid this turmoil, waves of displaced peoples roamed in search of new lands and resources. Among them were the enigmatic Sea Peoples, a confederation of seafaring tribes whose sudden emergence is noted in Egyptian records. By the early 12th century BC, Egypt had managed to stand while other civilizations faltered. Pharaoh Ramses III, who reigned from 1186 to 1155 BC, now found his kingdom under severe pressure. A climactic confrontation between Egypt and the Sea Peoples was on the horizon, with the stability of the entire region hanging in the balance. This confrontation, known to history as the Battle of the Delta, is the first recorded naval battle in history. The term Sea Peoples itself is modern, derived from ancient Egyptian references to a coalition of invaders from the sea or from northern countries. Some names recorded by the Egyptians hint at far-off origins. For example, some scholars believe that one of the names indicates that one part of this coalition may have been from Sardinia in the western Mediterranean. Other groups possibly came from much closer by in the Aegean or Anatolia. Although many theories exist, no definitive evidence pinpoints where each group came from. What is clear is that by around 1200 BC, various tribes had banded together to both raid and seek new homes in the wealthy lands of the eastern Mediterranean. To the Egyptians, the Sea Peoples were a fearsome menace. They're depicted as well-armed warriors, some wearing intricate helmets, both factors indicating a high degree of sophistication in craftsmanship. They're depicted as arriving both by land, with wagons carrying families and belongings, and by sea, in open boats. These invaders weren't simply another army from a rival empire. They were whole populations on the move, possibly migrants looking for a new homeland rather than mere raiders. Egyptian accounts describe their onslaught as something akin to the land being struck by a tsunami. The force of these invading migrants was simply too great for anyone to withstand. It was against this tsunami that the pharaoh prepared to make his stand, with the fate of the Egyptian heartland hanging in the balance. Ramses, aware of the destruction that had befallen his neighbors, understood that an invasion of Egypt could be catastrophic. He took decisive action and marshaled Egypt's defenses. The pharaoh fortified key positions in the Nile Delta, deployed troops to the frontier region of southern Canaan, and prepared his navy for an impending battle. One arm of the Sea People's offensive came overland through the Levant. Ramses personally led his army in the Battle of Jahi in modern Lebanon, and won decisively, halting the land-based invaders. Meanwhile, the greater danger was approaching by sea, as a vast fleet carrying the bulk of the Sea Peoples set sail for the Egyptian delta, intending to land en masse. Ramses rushed back to the delta to face this seaborne invasion and prevent his nation from being overrun. Ramses planned to trap the Sea People's fleet before they could disembark onto Egyptian soil. Using the advantage of fighting on home territory and careful planning, he set up an ambush on the water. According to the inscriptions at Medinet Habu, the pharaoh allowed the enemy fleet to enter the Nile Delta's waterways unopposed. Once the Sea People's ships had sailed into the river's mouth, hidden Egyptian warships closed in behind them. At the same time, hundreds of Egyptian archers were stationed along the banks and on nearby ships, all with bows drawn and waiting. When the invaders reached the choke point of the delta, Ramses sprang his trap. At his signal, Egyptian archers unleashed a massive volley of arrows from both the shores and the decks of ships. The sudden barrage plunged the Sea Peoples into chaos. Under the hail of Egyptian arrows, enemy oarsmen and warriors fell, and their boats became vulnerable targets. When some invaders tried to steer toward the banks and land, they found the shore bristling with sharpened stakes planted to impede any landing. Caught off guard and suffering heavy losses, several of the Sea People's boats capsized or drifted uncontrollably in the Nile's channels. Seizing the moment, Ramses ordered his fleet to attack from the rear and flanks. The Egyptians were no great seafarers, which turned out to be a massive advantage in this naval showdown. The Egyptian warships were smaller and more agile in the delta channels, and rammed into the larger enemy ships that had difficulty maneuvering. Grappling hooks were thrown as Egyptian marines boarded the Sea People's vessels, and brutal hand-to-hand combat erupted on the decks. The invaders, already disarrayed by the arrow fire, now found themselves assaulted at close quarters, and many were cut down before they could regroup. Those who managed to scramble onto land were met by waiting Egyptian infantry who swiftly routed them. By the battle's end, the waters of the delta were said to be clogged with wreckage and bodies. Egyptian reliefs vividly depict the aftermath: enemy ships overturned or dragged ashore, and drowned or defeated warriors scattered along the water's edge. Ramses III's inscriptions boast of a total victory, claiming that the Sea Peoples were completely annihilated. While such royal accounts are prone to exaggeration, modern historians believe this depiction contains truth. Egypt's preparation and tactics had indeed crushed the invasion. The Battle of the Delta, fought circa 1175 BC, stands as history's earliest recorded naval battle and showcases Ramses' military leadership and strategic forethought at its finest. The Egyptian victory in the Battle of the Delta was a turning point. Ramses' success repelled the invaders and spared Egypt the fate that befell so many of its neighbors. Egypt emerged as one of the few civilizations to survive the end of the Bronze Age with its institutions intact. Had the Sea Peoples breached Egypt's defenses, the continuity of Egyptian civilization might have been broken. Instead, thanks to the pharaoh's actions, Egypt lived on and continued its dynastic legacy. Egyptian records mention no pursuit of the Sea Peoples beyond Egypt's borders, and it appears the pharaoh was content that his realm was secured. For Egypt, the Battle of the Delta was the crowning achievement of Ramses III's reign, earning him a reputation as the last great pharaoh of the New Kingdom. However, the struggle against the Sea Peoples and other foes had strained Egypt's economy and military. The disruption of international trade and the costs of constant warfare left Egypt weaker in the long run. After his death, his successors faced internal unrest and economic difficulties. Egypt gradually withdrew from its former imperial territories and would never again reach the heights of power it had enjoyed in previous centuries. The ancient Romans had a term for the wild rage they perceived in their northern enemies: furor Teutonicus, meaning Teutonic or Germanic fury. This Latin phrase encapsulated the Roman belief in the extraordinary ferocity of the Germanic tribes. To Roman eyes, the Germanic warriors seemed to fight with a mad, berserker-like rage that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. In Roman literature, furor Teutonicus referred to the proverbial ferocity of the Teutons, a Germanic tribe, and by extension all Germanic peoples encountered by Rome. The phrase is attributed to the Roman poet Lucan in the 1st century AD, who first used it in his epic Pharsalia to describe what he saw as the defining trait of the Teutons. In Lucan's telling, this fury was almost otherworldly, a kind of battle madness that made the Germanic warriors exceptionally dangerous. The choice of words is telling, as furor in Latin implies not just anger, but a sort of crazed, uncontrolled wrath. This hints that the Romans viewed these warriors as possessed by an otherworldly lust for violence. This early literary usage cemented Führer Teutonicus as a shorthand for Germanic savagery, but also martial prowess. While Lucan may have given a name to the concept, the roots of this idea lay in real military encounters. Around the end of the 2nd century BC, the Roman Republic faced a dire threat from the north. A confederation of tribes, notably the Cimbri and the Teutons, migrated southwards, crashing into Rome's sphere in northern Italy, Gaul, and Hispania. In 113 BC at Neraea, a Roman army sent to ambush these migrating tribes was itself overwhelmed and defeated. The Romans documented a loss of 24,000 men in this encounter, nearly a complete wipe of their forces. Worse was to come in 105 BC, when Roman forces suffered a catastrophic loss at the Battle of Arosio. If classic sources are to be believed, the Germanic alliance fielded an army of 200,000 men, while the Romans fielded a force of 120,000 men. Whatever the correct number, what's not disputed is that the Teutons and the Cimbri ended up annihilating up to 12 Roman legions and their auxiliaries. Gaius Marius would eventually crush the migratory tribes a few years later, but despite this, the legends of the otherworldly fury of these wild men grew in the telling. If the Cimbrian War introduced Rome to the furor of Germanic tribes, the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD confirmed the enduring potency of that fear. In this infamous ambush, a coalition of Germanic tribes led by Arminius annihilated 3 Roman legions under Varus in the deep forests of Germania. Roman sources recount with horror how over the course of several days, the Germans methodically destroyed the entire Roman force, roughly 20,000 men, sparing almost no one. The slaughter halted Emperor Augustus's expansion into Germany and forced Rome into a permanent defensive stance behind the Rhine. The Führer Teutonicus seemed to have manifested again. To Roman eyes, the tribesmen emerged from the dark woods screaming battle cries, fueled by an untamable rage, and hacking the legions to pieces. They seemed completely impervious to pain, and really didn't seem concerned with anything beyond brutalizing their foes. This devastating defeat shook the Roman world to the very top. Suetonius writes that Augustus, upon hearing the news, wandered his palace in grief, crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." It's worth noting that not all Roman accounts were one-sided. Some observers also recognized organization and strategy among these fury-driven tribes. For instance, Arminius had actually served in a Roman auxiliary unit and used knowledge of Roman tactics to plan his ambush. Simply put, it's a detail that shows cold calculation, rather than some impulsive rage. Nevertheless, the lasting Roman memory of these clashes emphasized the dramatic elements, the howling war bands, the forest ambushes, and the near-superhuman endurance of their warriors. Modern historians point out that these Roman depictions were often propaganda and oversimplification. Romans like Julius Caesar didn't hesitate to use stereotypes of Germanic ferocity to justify preemptive strikes or territorial conquest. Caesar himself wrote that the Gauls feared the Germans for their size and ferocity, and he leveraged that fear to legitimize his campaigns across the Rhine. Modern historians, on the other hand, believe Germanic tribes had complex societies and varied warfare tactics, not just blind fury. But Roman audiences came to expect the trope of the raging barbarian, and writers obliged. Over time, the Führer Teutonicus stereotype became self-perpetuating. Later authors who never saw a Germanic battle still repeated the old tales of savage onslaughts, keeping the myth alive regardless of changing realities. As time went on, the Germanic tribes became more and more accustomed to Roman ways. They became much less like the wild men Marius crushed in the 2nd century BC, and much more similar to other people on the outskirts of the empire. Tacitus's Germania, published at the end of the 1st century AD, put a twist on the Furor Teutonicus as being a virtuous and manly quality. Tacitus praised certain qualities of the Germanic people such as their bravery, simplicity, strong family bonds, and love of feasting and fighting. Notably, he wasn't entirely intending to present this as an unbiased view of the Germanic peoples on the frontier. His agenda was partly to critique Roman society by holding up these barbarians as uncorrupted models of virtue. The Germanic people, with their Teutonic fury, were fighting for the pure love of combat and for their friends and family. This was intended to shame the Roman elite, the descendants of great warriors, many of whom were now more interested in material wealth than timeless Roman virtues. In the end, the legacy of Furor Teutonicus is a blend of reality and myth. It was born from real clashes on the battlefield, amplified by Roman writers into a larger-than-life stereotype, and then reinterpreted across generations into legend. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. On the vast Eurasian steppe in the 12th century, a child named Temujin was born under auspicious signs. Mongol legend says the baby emerged holding a blood clot in his fist, an omen that he would become a great warrior. He was likely born around 1162, though some accounts place it a few years earlier or later, near the Onan River in modern-day Mongolia. His birth name was reportedly given in honor of a rival chieftain his father had defeated in battle. Though born to a chieftain's family, Temujin's early life was anything but easy, and the boy who would be known as Genghis Khan first had to survive hardship, family betrayal, and exile. For decades, his world was one of clan feuds, unforgiving wilderness, and personal trials that would have broken many others. Temujin's father, Yesugei, was a minor Mongol chieftain with many enemies. When Temujin was about 9 years old, Yesugei was poisoned by rivals in an act of vengeance. With Yesugei dead, rival leaders cast out Yesugei's family, forcing Temujin's mother Hoelun and 7 children to fend for themselves on the open steppe. The family then endured extreme poverty, with Hoelun leading her children to survive on roots, berries, and fish instead of the meat and milk diet they had once known. Struggling to survive, the family also suffered internal strife. Temujin's older half-brother Begter tried to dominate the household, causing bitter conflict. Eventually, Temujin and his younger brother cut down Begter rather than submit to his bullying. This grim act of fratricide, born of desperation, was later omitted from official histories, but is frankly described in the Mongols' secret history. With no powerful allies left, hostile clan members soon seized the teenage Temujin, clamped a wooden collar around his neck, and held him captive. Even in bondage, Temujin refused to accept defeat. One night he made a daring escape, knocking down his guard and fleeing into the darkness. Hunted by his captors, he hid in rivers and thickets. At one point, a local man, moved by the fugitive's plight, risked his own life to help Temujin hide, and then slip away safely. Such loyalty from a stranger made a deep impression on Temujin. It showed that through courage and charisma, he could inspire others to follow him. By his mid-teens, Temujin had survived abandonment, betrayal, and imprisonment, experiences that steeled his will and taught him the value of alliances. Free and determined, Temujin gradually gathered a small band of followers. One early companion, a youth named Borchu, joined in to help the future Great Khan chase down some horse thieves, afterward pledging himself as a loyal follower. With a few loyal allies by his side, Temujin regained a foothold in Mongol politics. Around the age of 16, he turned to an alliance from his childhood: marriage. He married Berta, the young woman to whom he had been betrothed years before, who had faithfully awaited his return, thereby cementing a bond between their families and tribes. Berta's dowry was a valuable sable fur coat, which Temujin offered as a gift to Togrul, known as Ong Khan, of the Karait tribe. Togrul, who had been Yesugei's friend, was so impressed that he accepted Temujin as a foster son and ally. This alliance soon proved vital. Not long after, the Merkit tribe, seeking revenge for Hölin's long-ago abduction, attacked Temujin's camp at night and abducted Berta. Faced with this crisis, Temujin appealed to his two strongest allies, Togrul and Jamuka, a childhood friend with whom he had sworn brotherhood. Both men answered his call, and with their combined forces, Temujin attacked the Merkit, defeated them, and rescued Berta. Not long after, Berta bore a son, Jochi, and Temujin accepted him as his own, despite paternity rumors. The successful rescue of his wife greatly boosted his standing among the steppe tribes. Many more warriors, heartened by his growing fame, flocked to his banner. For a time, Jamuka remained at Temujin's side, and in 1286 Temujin's followers boldly proclaimed him Khan, effectively recognizing him as an independent leader. According to one account, a shaman then declared that the sky god Tengri had destined Temujin to rule the world, a prophecy that thrilled his followers and unnerved his rivals. This rising prominence, however, planted the seeds of a future conflict with Jamuka. It was not long before Temujin's relationship with Jamuka turned from friendship to rivalry. Jamuka, from a proud aristocratic lineage, grew resentful as Temujin's influence and unorthodox merit-based leadership style expanded. Temujin promoted allies for their loyalty and talent rather than aristocratic birth, a shocking break from tradition that drew more supporters to him but enraged nobles like Jamuka. Their alliance broke apart, and in 1187 they clashed in open warfare. The decisive battle took place at Dalan Baljut, where Jamuka's forces defeated Temujin, forcing him to flee and regroup. Over the next decade, Temujin lay low and rebuilt his strength, and about 10 years later, he re-emerged stronger than ever. Little is known about this period, but it's speculated that he was able to tear off a significant contingent of Jamuka's men. After all, going with the future Great Khan offered significant growth opportunities for men who weren't of any particular noble status. With Jamuka, everything came down to your lineage, as it always had. It only makes sense that the most talented non-noble tribesmen who were pledged to Jamuka would drop him for Genghis Khan and the opportunity to improve their lot in life. Indeed, many of the Great Khan's most respected generals would end up being men of common birth. He even faced his former patron Togrul and defeated him in battle, proving that not even a one-time mentor could stop his rise. The final obstacle to Temujin's supremacy was Jamuka. In 1204, Temujin's forces crushed the powerful Naiman tribe with whom Jamuka had allied. Jamuka fled, but soon his own men betrayed him and delivered him into Temujin's hands. These traitors had assumed they were in for a big reward, and in a way, they weren't wrong. It just wasn't the sort of reward they were hoping for. Demonstrating his code of loyalty, Temujin eliminated those traitors for betraying their lord, who was, after all, still his sworn brother, despite their bitter conflicts. As for Jamuka, Temujin offered mercy on the condition that he serve him, but Jamuka refused. According to the secret history of the Mongols, Jamuka responded, quote, "There cannot be two suns in the sky, nor two Khans ruling the earth." With that, Jamuka was granted an honorable death, and Temujin had become the paramount ruler of the Mongol steppe. In 1206, a great council of all Mongol chiefs from across the steppe, a Kurultai, proclaimed Temujin as the supreme ruler of a unified Mongol nation. He was formally given the title Genghis Khan, often interpreted to mean universal ruler. And that's the official story. But of course, it does remain somewhat of an open question how accurate this narrative is. Our knowledge of Genghis Khan's early life comes primarily from a 13th century Mongolian text called The Secret History of the Mongols, mentioned earlier. This remarkable chronicle offers the most complete account of Temujin's youth from the Mongols' own perspective. Fittingly, its title includes the word secret, because originally only the Mongol royal family and those given special favor were allowed to read it. It blends factual history with legend. For example, tracing Temujin's ancestry to a mythical wolf and noting prophetic signs at his birth. Written for the Mongol royal family, the secret history even includes unflattering details that later official histories left out, such as Temujin's fatal ambush on his half-brother. Historians consider the secret history indispensable but approach it with caution. It's the only near-contemporary Mongol source on Genghis Khan's early life, and so many events, especially private or minor incidents, can't be confirmed by outside records. Some aspects of its narrative likely contain bias or exaggeration intended to glorify the royal family. Other sources from the 13th century, written by Persian and Chinese historians, provide additional information, but were composed years later by outsiders. However, these histories focus on what happened after the Great Khan burst onto the world stage. Ultimately, without the secret history, the story of Temujin's early struggles and rise would be a complete unknown. By combining this precious Mongol chronicle with other records from the period, scholars today can roughly trace the rise to power of one of history's most influential people. Imagine the scene in 1566. In the busy Baltic port of Lübeck, townsfolk gathered by the Trave River to witness the launch of a truly awe-inspiring ship. This vessel was the Adler von Lübeck, German for Eagle of Lübeck, a galleon so large and imposing that it captured the imagination of all who saw it. Built by the prosperous Hanseatic city during the height of its maritime power, the Adler von Lübeck was intended to be a flagship like no other. Measuring around 256 feet from stern to bow and displacing an estimated 3,000 tons, it ranked among the largest ships in the world upon completion. Its towering masts and broad decks symbolize the ambitions of Lübeck and the Hanseatic League, in an era when control of the seas meant wealth and influence. The saga of the Adler von Lübeck offers a window into an era of ambitious naval endeavors and shifting fortunes on the high seas. The ship was built at Lübeck's shipyards with craftsmanship befitting its grand scale. Construction began in 1565, and by March 1566, the colossal galleon was ready to launch. Building such a leviathan required vast quantities of materials, hundreds of oak timbers for the hull, tall pine trunks for masts, and tons of iron for fittings and cannons. It was a four-masted vessel with masts rising 200 feet above the waterline. The hull was stout and broad, built to support multiple cannon decks and the weight of heavy ordnance. Designed as a floating fortress, the Adler could carry roughly 1,000 men, including about 350 sailors and a further 650 soldiers, to operate the ship and its weapons. Those weapons were staggering for the time. The galleon was outfitted with 138 cannons of various sizes. These ranged from small cannons for close defense to massive 48-pounders capable of smashing enemy hulls. Few ships in the 16th century could rival such firepower or sheer size. The Adler von Lübeck was a product of turbulent times in Northern Europe. Its construction was sparked by the Northern Seven Years' War, which ran from 1563 to 1570. This was a conflict pitting Sweden against a coalition of the Danish crown, the city of Lübeck and her Hanseatic satellites, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Control of Baltic trade routes was at stake, and as a leading Hanseatic port, Lübeck had a vested interest in protecting its commerce from Swedish fleets and privateers. The Adler was envisioned as a formidable convoy escort, essentially a guardian for merchant ships sailing the Baltic and North Seas. It was rare for a city-state to field a warship of such size. This bold undertaking was a testament to Lübeck's extreme wealth and determination to safeguard its maritime lifeline. Despite the ship's fearsome potential, fate had other plans. By the time the Adler was completed and fully fitted out, peace negotiations were already underway between Lübeck's alliance and Sweden. The war ended with the Treaty of Stettin in 1570 before the ship ever fired a shot in anger. Having never seen combat, the Grand War Galleon suddenly found itself without a war to fight. In the years that followed, it was repurposed from man-of-war to merchantman, converted into a cargo ship to carry goods on long-distance trade routes, including voyages to the Iberian Peninsula. When the Adler von Lübeck was launched, it gained a reputation as the largest ship afloat. Contemporary observers marveled at its dimensions, and later historians often called it the biggest ship in the world of its time. In truth, it was certainly among the very largest vessels built in the 16th century. Only a handful of other ships even came close to its size. For example, earlier in the 1500s, the Portuguese galleon São João Baptista and Scotland's great ship Great Michael were considered gigantic in their day. Yet both were significantly smaller than the Adler in tonnage and length, with the São João Baptista tonnage being up to 1/3 less than the Adler von Lübeck. The largest of the famed Chinese treasure ships of the early 15th century might have rivaled the ship. However, by the time the Eagle kept watch over the Hanseatic fleet, no other vessel on any sea anywhere in the world could eclipse its impressive measurements. Not until well into the 1600s would warships be built that could rival or exceed the Adler's dimensions, showing just how extraordinary this 1660s galleon truly was. It's necessary to consider the other ships that were afloat at the same time as the Adler to truly understand how imposing this was, and why it was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Sweden's heavy warship Mars, which was launched in 1564, was 158 feet, with about 1,800 tons of displacement. Despite the impressive dimensions, it was considerably smaller than the Adler in both size and firepower. Likewise, when the Spanish Armada sailed against England in 1588, the largest galleons in that fleet were around 1,000 tons at most, only about 1/3 of the Adler's tonnage. After its brief stint as a military flagship without a war, the Adler von Lübeck spent the rest of its days in civilian service. Following the peace of 1570, it was refitted as a merchant vessel and put to work hauling cargo between the Baltic and the Atlantic. For over 2 decades, the great ship plied the seas in relative peace, carrying goods between northern Europe and destinations like Spain and Portugal. Her heavy cannons were removed to make way for more cargo, as the former war galleon took on a humbler but profitable role in trade. By the late 1580s, time and the elements had taken their toll on the ship, and the high cost of maintaining such a huge vessel was hard to justify. By 1588, coincidentally the same year the Spanish Armada met its defeat, the aging Adler was retired and broken up for scrap. Its timbers and ironwork were repurposed, ending the life of a ship that had once been the pride of the powerful Hanseatic League. Though the Adler von Lübeck never saw the battles it was built for, its legacy endures as a remarkable feat of naval engineering. It's also a testament to the sheer influence and economic power of this North German city. Despite having a population of no more than 25,000 people, Lübeck was able to fund and maintain the largest ship of the era, while also maintaining a large naval fleet overall.